This image comes from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and is based on state-of-the-art knowledge as of 2007. This plot shows the radiative forcings of various anthropogenic and natural forcings. We will refer to this plot several times today, so let's review the figure. The left panel shows forcings divided into anthropogenic and natural. The middle plot shows the amount of radiative forcing for each forcing. Red bars are positive radiative forcings, that is, that the Earth receives more energy due to that particular forcing, whereas the blue bars indicate negative radiative forcing, that is, that the Earth is receiving less energy as a result of that particular forcing. Moving right, the next column shows an actual value for each forcing. The last column shows the level of scientific understanding, or LOSU. An LOSU says, it gives you an idea of the probability that the radiative forcing is accurate. A high LOSU indicates that the probability that the RF is accurate is high. As I mentioned, the last plot came from the IPCC, or Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is a world organization, and scientists from all over the world participate and bring together and synthesize everything we know about climate change and report on it. This comes out every 5 to 10 years. I mentioned that the plot that we were just looking at was in the report published in 2007. The last report to come out was published in 2013, and the next report was due out in 2021, but has been delayed because of COVID and will be published in 2022. This is a really invaluable resource of information on climate change. It's important to understand that radiative forcings can include both direct and indirect forcings. Direct forcings are those that directly alter the climate. For example, adding carbon dioxide into the atmosphere increases the greenhouse effect directly. Indirect forcings cause a change to something that then alters the climate. Adding carbon monoxide doesn't directly affect the climate system, but reactions in the atmosphere can convert carbon monoxide to carbon dioxide and thereby indirectly alter the greenhouse effect and climate system. As we discussed last week, feedbacks are another important part of understanding the impact a particular forcing will have. In the last radiative forcing plot we looked at, it did not consider feedbacks. But of course, they are really important to making accurate predictions of climate change. You can use this slide to review some of the potential feedbacks resulting from increasing radiative forcing and warming. In the 2013 IPCC report, scientists recognized the importance of feedbacks and came up with the idea of an enhanced radiative forcing. These enhanced radiative forcings, or ERFs, also take into account some of the very rapid feedbacks. Recognizing the importance of feedbacks, the IPCC tried to incorporate feedbacks into their analysis of radiative forcing. In this plot, bars that are solid are enhanced radiative forcing, and hatched bars are radiative forcing. That means with no feedbacks. In 2013, the radiative forcing of all greenhouse gases was more than 2.5 watts per meter squared. We will now consider some of the other forcings shown here. Let's start with surface albedo and contrails. If you remember back to lecture 2, when we discussed the Anthropocene, we talked about how humans had dramatically altered the Earth's surface. Changes in the Earth's surface affects changes in the Earth's albedo. For example, changing forested landscapes to croplands and pastures has changed the reflectivity of Earth's surface. Generally, replacing forests with agriculture leads to an increase in albedo and decrease in the radiative forcing. This means the loss of wildlands shown from the upper two maps indicating a relatively small amount of croplands in 1790 to the bottom two maps indicating much more extensive croplands by 1990 would cause a decrease in radiative forcing, which would lead to cooling. But be careful. The loss of trees also leads to a reduction in the amount of CO2 taken up by vegetation and the terrestrial system, leading to a warming. Surface albedo can also change as a result of deposition of small particles from the atmosphere. One example is black carbon. Black carbon results from the incomplete combustion of biomass and fuels, and is comprised of very tiny, very black particles. This slide shows black carbon emissions. Look at the yellow lines in the oceans. What do you think is causing these elevated emissions of black carbon? If you said ships, you were right. Take a look at the red colors over India. The more red the colors, the higher the black carbon emissions. Why do you think black carbon emissions are high here? We'll look at this in more detail in the next few slides. In India, black carbon is produced by biomass burning and vehicles. The black carbon lands on nearby surfaces. In India, black carbon covers snow and ice surfaces in the Himalayas. This changes the surface albedo and reduces energy being reflected by ice and snow back into space. This increases radiative forcing. However, an increase in radiative forcing is not the only result or not the only problem black carbon causes. Last year, research reported that black carbon on snow and ice surfaces was speeding the melting of glaciers, already underway in the Himalayas as a result of warmer temperatures. This not only changes the effects of surface albedo, but affects the water supply of many people living downstream. This map shows the Himalayas in green, and in blue and gray you see the major rivers and river basins respectively that are fed by the Himalaya ice. When the ice disappears, so does an important source of fresh water. The lakes forming at the terminus of the ice are evidence that the glaciers are melting. Directly or indirectly, these glaciers supply millions of people with food, energy, clean water, and incomes. With the disappearance of the glaciers, major socioeconomic consequences will occur. This is a really nice example that shows how the Earth's spheres, including humans, which are part of the biosphere, and the climate system are all interconnected. And when we change one, we can have impacts on all of the systems, all of the spheres. Contrails from plains are another way that the climate system has been forced by human activities. Contrails formed by plains absorb energy and lead to cooling. We see from the maps on the right that the radiative forcing caused by contrails is positive, but is especially positive at night. Why do you think this is? The radiative forcing caused by changes in surface albedo and contrails roughly balances each other out. There may be a very slight cooling as a result of a slight negative radiative forcing. The next forcing we'll consider are aerosols, which are tiny solid and liquid particles suspended in the atmosphere. Aerosols can come from natural and human sources. Today, aerosols are being increased dramatically by several human activities. This map shows the distribution of aerosols. Note the hot spot in aerosols downwind of the Sahara Desert. This is caused by very fine desert dust, being blown downwind. The radiative forcing of aerosols is dependent on the type of aerosol. For example, black carbon, which we talked about already, leads to more long-wave energy being absorbed by the atmosphere, whereas sulfites lead to more reflection of incoming radiation. These maps show the distribution of aerosols on the left, and this is based on satellite data. On the right, we see the results of a modeling research, which shows the distribution of sulfates. Notice the high levels of sulfate over China. This is a result of burning coal. And in fact, the increase in sulfates from burning coal over China has kept it cooler. Aerosols can also occur naturally, for example in sea spray and from volcanoes. This slide shows aerosols from volcanoes over time. Although volcanoes typically result in cooling, they are not included in the IPCC plot because they are episodic, short-lived, and difficult to predict. As well as affecting Earth's climate directly, aerosols can indirectly affect Earth's climate. Aerosols can act as seeds for water droplet nucleation. Clouds formed with aerosols contain more and smaller droplets, which generally increase their brightness. These images are looking specifically at the aerosols from ships. The right image shows the particle size in the ship track, while the left shows the optical thickness, which shows how much energy reaches the Earth's surface. Smaller particles create brighter, more reflective clouds, which creates a decrease in radiative forcing and a cooling. However, this isn't necessarily a good thing because the smaller particles are also less likely to lead to rain. Several publications have suggested that small particles in clouds can actually lead to drought. Understanding the radiative forcing of clouds, whether they're formed naturally or by the production of aerosols, is another challenge for climate change sciences. Some types of clouds are more likely to reflect energy, while others more likely to absorb energy. When we talk about climate models, we'll come back to this. Looking at the plot from the IPCC, we see that aerosols, through both direct and indirect effects, generally cause cooling. Radiation from the sun also varies over time. Recall from earlier lectures we said that the solar constant was 1,367 watts per meter squared. This number is determined based on calculations. Observations at the top of the atmosphere show that the actual incoming irradiance varies between 1,361 to 1,362 watts per meter squared between 1980 and 2010. These variations also have a radiative forcing, which is slightly positive over this time period. Here you can see the very slight positive radiative forcing of solar irradiance. Adding all of the forcings together, we find that the total radiative forcing is approximately 2.3 watts per meter squared. We can also look at how radiative forcing has varied over time. In this image, we look at radiative forcing from 1880 to 2010. The graph on the left shows changes of radiative forcing of individual climate forcings, whereas the plot on the right shows the total radiative forcing. Which forcing has caused the largest positive radiative forcing? If you said greenhouse gases, you were correct. Which forcing causes large, short-lived negative forcings? In this case, the answer is volcanoes. Take a look at the plot on the right, what is the general trend in total radiative forcing? If you said an increasing trend, you were correct. And this is largely driven by increasing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere as a result of human activities. Extending our view back even further, we can see that the recent increase in radiative forcing is unusual, at least for the last 1,000 years.